SpaceX's Rideshare Bandwagon 3 mission marks the 300th orbital flight from Cape Canaveral's Pad 40. SpaceX launches third mid-inclination rideshare mission. SpaceX launches European re-entry capsule on Bandwagon 3 rideshare mission. Satellites and capsule launch on SpaceX's Bandwagon 3 mission. You would think nothing went wrong with this mission whatsoever if you had a look at most of the mainstream media stories. As a matter of fact, just about every media story would seem to suggest that the Bandwagon 3 mission went perfectly. But that is actually not the case. There was a prominent client on board, this European re-entry capsule that all the stories are talking about, that got burned pretty seriously. A company called Atmos and an innovative re-entry capsule, an inflatable solution that could revolutionize low Earth orbit industry. However, even though the technology appears to have functioned perfectly, and even though the Falcon 9 flight went perfectly, at least from a technical standpoint, the capsule was lost, and so too were the customers on board this capsule, other experimental vehicles that were riding on this European re-entry solution. And why did this happen? Well, it's because of how SpaceX Rideshare works, and how sometimes if you go with this low-cost solution, you get precisely what you pay for. All of this and more coming up on The Angry Astronaut right now. Good afternoon, spaceflight enthusiasts, and welcome to another Angry Bulletin. In case you didn't see my last episode, well, check it out. The merch store is open. Have a look at this. Pretty cool, huh? And this is just the Apophis shirt, or rather the Apophis hoodie. Now have a look at some of the other items real quick. We have reopened the store. Look at these. Look at the quality of this stuff. Shirt. Look at that. Oh yeah, look at that. You know what? Unlike Teespring, unlike these other sorry companies, these logos don't wash out. The material is so comfortable. And again, links to the merch store are all in the description. In addition to that, I'm giving away several of these to random Patreon and Super Chat supporters over the course of the next month and a half. So if you're interested in all of that, all the details are in the description. But let's talk about SpaceX. Now, before I talk any further about this topic, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. SpaceX didn't do anything wrong here. They didn't violate their contract. I'm sure all of this was spelled out to the customer ahead of time. I'm sure that the customer were just willing to take the chance that they took on this particular rideshare mission. However, it ended up burning them, and you're going to find out exactly why this is going to have a significant impact on SpaceX rideshare missions in the future and their potential customers. Because a lot of people have confronted me in the past, especially people who just don't like my general opinions about SpaceX, the fact that I'm not unconditionally supportive of them, that SpaceX Rideshare is the cheapest game in town. The cost per kilogram is so much less than everybody else. What's the point in reporting on companies like Rocket Lab or Firefly or some of these new European launch providers that are emerging? None of these companies can match the price per kilogram on SpaceX Rideshare. So why the hell would anybody really go with these guys? Makes no sense. How could they possibly be successful? And yet, somehow, Rocket Lab has launched over 60 rockets to space at this point, and Firefly is having a great deal of success as well. And it's not just off of their non-launch services business. They're making money on the launch side as well. They're picking up new customers all the time, including lucrative government customers. How is this possible? How is it when SpaceX has the cheapest game in town when it comes to price per kilogram, how can they possibly compete? Well, let's find out. The company in question is a German company called Atmos Space Cargo, and they are paving the way for a sustainable space ecosystem that will transform entire industries and improve life on Earth through what's called the Phoenix Return capsule. And it was a prototype of this capsule that flew on this rideshare mission. We deliver affordable, scalable, and sustainable Earth to space to Earth solutions for companies and institutions worldwide. Atmos stands at the forefront of a new paradigm, facilitating scientific discovery and technological advancements to benefit and evolve humanity. So let's have a look at the details of this Phoenix capsule and what it can actually do. And by the way, what you're watching right now is an atmospheric test of what the Phoenix is supposed to do in space. That is to say, fly up to space and then re-enter via an inflatable heat shield, splash down in the ocean, where you can retrieve the heat shield and the Phoenix and whatever cargoes might be on board. These cargoes include a number of different types of industries that can only be made in microgravity, like unique types of alloys, or 3D printed organs, or new types of pharmaceuticals. I mean, these things are worth a lot of money, but the only way they're going to be worth a lot of money is if the heat shield survives re-entry, first of all, and if you can effectively retrieve the heat shield. So the Phoenix capsule that launched on the SpaceX Rideshare mission has the following capabilities: a payload capacity of 100 kilograms. That may not sound like much, but again, these are very, very valuable substances that are being manufactured in microgravity. They can be worth sometimes as much as hundreds of thousands of dollars per kilogram. The flight duration is selectable for up to 3-month missions and perhaps even longer, and it has a modest amount of onboard power of up to 100 watts, although they claim they might be able to scale it up from there. It has a pressurized payload bay if the customer desires, with temperatures selectable from 20 degrees Celsius to 37 degrees Celsius, and other temperatures being available as well, along with a vacuum payload bay, which honestly I think is going to be used far more commonly, as microgravity materials also work better in vacuum than in some kind of atmosphere. In addition to that, they provide end-to-end service, transport to the launch site from customer-selected aviation airport, payload integration at the launch site, payload retrieval on return from space. That's a very big deal, and you'll find out why in a second. And then payload return to customer-selected aviation airport. So this space donut is actually an inflatable atmospheric decelerator, which functions both as a heat shield and as a high-velocity parachute, protecting the cargo during re-entry into the atmosphere. And of course, it also is a flotation device, and that's great because it kind of looks like a life preserver. Unlike the propulsive landing method, which is becoming the industry standard for returning first stages now, in other words, SpaceX, our technology uses zero fuel. This is not only better for the environment, but it also makes our solution more lightweight. In fact, IADs are so lightweight that they can be used to recover and reuse complete micro launchers. They can also be retrofitted to make almost any rocket stage, space module, or satellite returnable and reusable. This is innovative, bleeding edge stuff, and it was very important to Atmos that this first experiment go very well. And as far as we know, it did. But unfortunately, the whole recovering the spacecraft thing didn't go very well because of SpaceX and their rideshare policies. And frankly, it kind of amazes me that the Elon Musk hating mainstream media did not pick up on all of this. But let me go ahead and share with you a story from Universe Space Tech. Quote, German startup Atmos Space Cargo has conducted the first test of its Phoenix 1 capsule to test the stability of the heat shield during re-entry. However, due to changes in SpaceX's mission, the dream of obtaining key data turned out to be a failure. The capsule was launched on on April 22nd on a Falcon 9 rocket as part of the Bandwagon 3 mission. On board with it were a South Korean military satellite and a weather device from Boston. However, due to the prioritization of the Korean cargo, the guys were paying a lot more money than anybody else, the flight path was changed 5 weeks before launch. This disrupted Atmos's plans. The capsule's new return route was over South America, not Africa, as expected. Atmos explained how they tried to contend with this situation in a statement a few weeks ago. Quote, "Initially, our capsule was set to follow a return trajectory designed to pass over designated ground stations in Africa and Mauritius before splashing down in the Indian Ocean off the eastern coast of La Réunion. We had set up ground stations along this path to ensure continuous data downlink from our heat shield sensors and onboard payloads, data essential for advancing Phoenix's development. With a recent update in the overall mission design, our flight path angle and return trajectory has changed, so we went back to the drawing board to quickly adapt, keeping our mission objectives in focus. Our new flight path will have Phoenix 1 initiate its deorbit path over Los Angeles, California, and splash down approximately 2,000 kilometers off the coast of Brazil in the Atlantic Ocean. In order to accommodate this new re-entry and descent corridor, our team put in relentless efforts and successfully identified and set up suitable ground stations to establish communication with our capsule for critical downlink within just a few weeks. However, in spite of their best efforts, not everything went as planned. Since Atmos could not set up ground stations over the most key part of this re-entry corridor, that is to say, over the South Atlantic Ocean, they chartered an aircraft to try to pick up this data and track the spacecraft and also watch its re-entry, but the splashdown ended up being 500 kilometers farther off the coast, preventing Atmos from acquiring the data. They did receive data from 4 commercial payloads that were on board the vehicle, and initial indicators suggest that the capsule's heat shield was inflated successfully, but sadly, they're not going to be able to recover the vehicle, so they can't be sure about any of this. They have announced that this was a largely successful mission, but once again, retrieving the vehicle or at least observing it re-enter and getting the best possible data would have been a much better situation. But unfortunately, because the Korean military was paying way more money than they were, Atmos is essentially out of luck. According to some experts, quote, "It was a success for the technology, but a failure for the mission." Now, Atmos CEO Sebastian Klaus has been very positive about the whole thing and has said, quote, "We have proven that we can adapt quickly to change. Next time, we will set up beacons to search." However, all of that being the case, next time one would hope that they went with a dedicated solution that would put their spacecraft precisely where they wanted it to go and not where the launch provider tells them that they need to go. Because consider everything that they had to do. Certainly, there was considerable expense involved in setting up a whole new chain of ground stations, chartering an aircraft, everything else they had to do at the last second, and then in the end, to not retrieve the data that they wanted to, and arguably the most important part of the mission, retrieving the spacecraft, well, they didn't get to do that either. But do they have an alternative? Do companies like Atmos, who can't spend tens of millions of dollars on a dedicated flight, have any other alternatives? Well, yes, actually, they do. So after researching this story, something occurred to me in terms of a good way, a good illustration to compare the SpaceX Rideshare situation to a more common situation in people's everyday lives. Suppose you're in a carpooling situation where a group of people have to get to work in southern Manhattan. They may work for different companies, but all these companies are in the same general area. Now, let's say you have a deal with the driver of the car that you pay him $1, to help him out with his gas expenses or something like that, or maybe $2. But there's somebody else in your car that is much better off than everyone else and pays $100. But Everything goes pretty much as planned. Everybody gets to work on time. Really no problem. Got a hell of a deal, right? But then one day, while you're on your way to southern Manhattan, suddenly the $100 guy gets a call and finds out that he needs to go to Philadelphia instead. And he needs to do it immediately. What do you suppose the driver's going to do? He's got little choice but to give priority to the $100 guy over your sorry ass at $2 or $3 or whatever it ends up being. And so as a result, you end up getting to work hours late. You can't make other arrangements. You're already in the car. So you get to your job, and like most employers, they're not going to fire you for your first offense or anything like that. But when you explain the situation, your boss says, well, you know what? You may want to make other transportation arrangements. What am I going to do? How am I going to get to work as effectively as I always have? There's no train stations close to where I live, no bus service that really is going to get me there quickly. I don't have any other alternatives. I can't afford a car. What am I going to do? And you know something? That's where Rocket Lab comes in. Now, on the surface, it would appear that Rocket Lab is just way too expensive compared to SpaceX Rideshare. For a dedicated mission on an Electron rocket, you're looking at about $37,000 per kilogram, whereas on a SpaceX Rideshare, it's $325,000 for the first 50 kilograms, and that's $6,500 per kilogram after that. I mean, such an enormous difference, but let's have a look at the cost comparisons between these two missions. Let's say that Atmos was going with a Rocket Lab solution. A dedicated launch would cost about $7.5 million, whereas the mission that they did with SpaceX cost about $2 million or so. That's a savings of $5.5 million. I mean, an open and shut case, right? Well, here's the problem. The Phoenix capsule development has cost 13.1 million euros in total funding, including 2.5 million in grants, 5.3 million in equity from the EIC fund, and 5.3 million euros in private equity. And now Atmos has to go back to all of those investors and tell them that they lost the spacecraft. They did not get all the data that they wanted to get because they wanted to save $5 million in launch costs. And by the way, they didn't even save quite that much because they had to set up a whole new chain of observation stations. They had to charter an aircraft. Who knows how many additional charges that Atmos had to pile up just to try to make all of this work. And even then, it didn't work as well as it should have. So, by the way, what you're watching right now is a Varda Space Industries mission, or rather a promotional video for this mission. Varda does very much the same thing that Atmos does. They're making microgravity products in low Earth orbit and re-entering with a reusable capsule and splashing down or setting down in the deserts of Australia. And they do it with dedicated missions with Rocket Lab instead of trying to save money on ride shares. And included in Rocket Lab's charges is a Photon spacecraft that has its own propulsion system, its own power, and a lot more control over re-entry, allowing for a lot more precision. And of course, in spite of FAA problems that prevented them from setting down in Nevada as they originally intended, Varda was able to re-enter their capsule successfully and retrieve it, gaining a lot more data, unfortunately, than Atmos did. Now, if you just want to go to space and you don't care where your spacecraft or experiment really goes as long as it's in low Earth orbit, then there's nothing better than rideshare. But if it gets any more complicated than that, Rocket Lab can sometimes be the better solution, which is why they've launched as many rockets as they have and why their stock has been exploding as of late. So once again, I want to reemphasize that I do not believe that SpaceX has done anything wrong here at all, even though it's possible that from the sales side, having been in sales for many years myself, I would say that there's a good chance that they may have misrepresented things to Atmos a little bit on the front end. It told them, well, no, this is the trajectory we're going to be using. It's not going to change. Don't worry about it. We got you. As long as your mission fits into this trajectory, everything's going to work out great. But all of a sudden, Atmos gets confronted with this situation, and no matter how much last-second scrambling they could do and how much money that they spent in order to try to compensate, the whole thing still didn't work out. Now, of course, publicly, Atmos probably is not going to agree with my position on this at all. Publicly, Atmos is saying that the mission was very much a success, because that's what they have to say. When you're talking about European investors, you don't want to announce failure. I've learned that from all the years that I've been covering European spaceflight. Announcing a failure because you made a bad decision is a great way to make sure that your investment dries up. Unlike American investors who are willing to tolerate a few spectacular failures before they give up on you, European supporters very often will give up on you after the first failure, especially if it was an avoidable failure. So, yeah, Atmos, they are not going to do anything aside from what they're doing at the moment, which is to announce a success. And in many ways, the mission was a success, but still, I'm sure they're really feeling the pain of not getting their test article back. There is so much that you can gain from that, and so much data, so much information, and not just for them, for also the payloads that rode on their particular spacecraft, this inflatable re-entry vehicle. They didn't get to retrieve it either, whereas they might have been able to. And I assure you that for future missions, Atmos is going to be looking long and hard at other alternatives. And it's not just them. It's going to be other customers in the same situation who don't want to have the same thing happen to them. And Rocket Lab isn't the only company that can capitalize. Of course, there's Firefly as well, and then these European launch providers. Now that Europe wants sovereign capability, they're going to have a whole slew of new opportunities because of this one particular incident. And it's my hope that the media catches up on this, because very few stories have been released about this particular issue. Very few media agencies have recognized what happened here, aside from a few specialized space-related reporters. But other than that, very few companies have really caught on to this. You're going to have a hard time finding news stories that talk about what just happened here. But it's my hope that some of them watch broadcasts like this and realize that you got to look beneath the surface if you want to get the real truth about what's happening in competitive spaceflight. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And also, please remember that the merch store is again open for less than 3 weeks, guys. And again, chances are items are going to be discontinued just as they were this last time, depending on how sales go. But in any event, thanks very much for your support. Thanks again for watching. And as always, stay angry about space.